A Confederate officer named Lieutenant Harry T. Buford fought at the First Battle of Bull Run, recruited nearly 400 soldiers for the Southern cause, and took shrapnel to the body on the battlefield. None of that is the remarkable part. The remarkable part is that Lieutenant Buford was a Cuban-born woman named Loreta Velazquez, and when the army finally figured that out and kicked her out, she walked to the next regiment and enlisted again under a different name. Then she did it a third time. This is a story where one childhood obsession with Joan of Arc set off a chain of decisions so reckless, so audacious, that 160 years later, professional historians still cannot agree on how much of it actually happened. And it all started with a book a little girl was never supposed to read. Loreta Velazquez was born in Havana, Cuba in 1842 to a wealthy family with deep roots in both Spanish aristocracy and Mexican politics. Her father was a diplomat. Her world was parlors and propriety. She was sent to New Orleans as a child to be educated by an aunt, groomed into the kind of refined Southern woman the era demanded. Quiet, obedient, decorative. But Loreta had gotten hold of stories about Joan of Arc, about women who had disguised themselves as men to fight in wars centuries earlier. And these stories didn't just entertain her, they rewired her. She later wrote that from the age of about 12, she began secretly experimenting with men's clothing, practicing walking differently, studying how boys carried themselves, not as a game, as preparation. She was convinced, with the irrational certainty only a child can sustain, that she was destined for something the world would never willingly offer her. Now here is where the first domino tips into the second. At some point in her teens, Loreta eloped with a young American soldier, against her family's explicit wishes. Her father essentially disowned her. This marriage did two things. It cut her off from the safety net of her wealthy family, and it placed her directly inside the orbit of the United States military at the exact moment the country was about to tear itself apart. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, her husband enlisted for the Confederacy almost immediately, and Loreta decided she was going with him, not as a wife waiting behind the lines, not as a nurse, as a soldier. The childhood obsession, the years of secret practice, the marriage that severed her from any other life. Every single piece was now in position. She just needed one more push. Her husband died early in the war. Some accounts say it was a training accident. Others are less clear. But the result was definitive. Loreta Velazquez was now a young widow with no family support, no money, and an absolute furnace of conviction burning inside her chest. She had nothing left to lose. So she built Lieutenant Harry T. Buford from scratch. The disguise was not casual. Loreta had a tailor construct a special uniform with internal wire frames sewn into the jacket to bulk up her silhouette and flatten her figure. She practiced deepening her voice. She glued on a fake mustache, reportedly using theatrical adhesive. She studied the mannerisms of officers she had observed through her husband's military circles. She didn't just put on a costume, she engineered an identity. And it worked. Under the name Harry T. Buford, she traveled across the South recruiting soldiers for the Confederate Army. By her own account, she raised a company of nearly 400 men. She then fought at the First Battle of Bull Run in July of 1861, one of the earliest and most chaotic engagements of the entire war. Thousands of men on both sides barely knew how to load their rifles. In that confusion, one more slight-framed young officer attracted zero suspicion. She reportedly also fought at the Battle of Bull's Bluff and was present at the Battle of Fort Donelson. At Fort Donelson, she claimed to have taken shrapnel wounds and was treated by a field surgeon who somehow did not discover her secret. Whether that detail is literally true or slightly embellished, the larger reality is confirmed by enough peripheral evidence that even skeptical historians accept the core premise. This woman fought in actual combat under fire more than once. But physics and biology are patient enemies, and the disguise was never going to hold forever. The first unmasking came when she was wounded seriously enough that a proper medical examination became unavoidable. A doctor discovered the truth. She was confronted, exposed, and expelled from her unit. This is the moment where any rational person reassesses their life choices. Loreta Velazquez was not that person. She simply moved to a different part of the theatre of war, where nobody knew Lieutenant Buford's face or story, and enlisted again. New regiment, same disguise, same fake mustache, same wireframe jacket. And she got caught again. The details vary depending on which source you trust, but the pattern is consistent across multiple accounts. She was discovered, removed, and each time she responded with the same baffling stubbornness. She found another unit that hadn't heard about her yet and talked her way back into uniform. What makes this chain of events so strange is not just the audacity. It is the fact that the system let her do it. The Confederate Army in 1861 and 62 was a bureaucratic disaster. There was no centralized personnel database, no photographs on file. Regiments were raised locally, often by whoever could talk enough men into showing up. If you looked the part and spoke with authority, you were in. Loreta exploited every crack in that system over and over, because the cracks were everywhere. Eventually, though, the disguise became unsustainable. Too many people in too many places had seen her face. The trick had an expiration date, and she was approaching it fast. So she pivoted, and this pivot may have been the most dangerous decision she ever made. Loreta transitioned into espionage. She reportedly worked as a Confederate spy and secret agent, operating behind Union lines. At times, she appears to have played both sides, gathering intelligence, running schemes, moving between identities the way most people change clothes. The details of her spy career are the murkiest part of her story, and deliberately so. Espionage in the Civil War was informal, deniable, and poorly documented by design. What we know comes largely from her own testimony and a handful of corroborating records. She claimed to have traveled to Washington, D.C. in disguise, as a woman this time, but a different woman, and gathered intelligence on Union troop movements. She said she worked with Confederate intelligence networks and operated under multiple aliases simultaneously. Some historians find these claims credible, pointing to documented cases of other women who did similar work during the war. Others think she inflated a modest courier role into something far more dramatic. The honest answer is that we may never know exactly where the truth ends and the legend begins. But the documented facts, the enlistments, the battles, the repeated discoveries, are extraordinary enough without any embellishment at all. In 1876, Loreta published a 600-page memoir titled The Woman in Battle. It is one of the most controversial books in Civil War historiography. In it, she described everything: the disguise, the battles, the spying, the multiple enlistments, the romantic entanglements, the sheer improbability of her survival. The book detonated immediately, not because people thought it was boring, because people thought it was too interesting. Confederate General Jubal Early, one of the most prominent voices of the Lost Cause mythology, launched a personal campaign to discredit her. He called the book a fraud. He pressured other Confederate veterans to denounce it. He wrote letters demanding that Southern newspapers refuse to review it. And here is the fascinating part. Early's objections were not primarily about factual accuracy. They were about image. Loreta's memoir portrayed the Confederate Army as an institution so chaotic and poorly managed that a woman could waltz in, fight in multiple battles, get discovered, and waltz right back in again. That was not the noble, disciplined, lost cause that Early was trying to sell to history. Her mere existence was an embarrassment to the narrative he was constructing. So the war over her story became, in miniature, a war over who gets to control history itself. Her book threatened a myth, and the mythmakers fought back. Modern historians remain divided. Some, like scholar William C. Davis, have argued that major portions of the memoir are fabricated or borrowed from other sources. Others, like researcher Jesse Alleman, have made compelling cases that far more of her account is verifiable than critics have acknowledged. The debate continues in academic journals to this day, which is itself a kind of legacy. This woman is still causing arguments a century and a half after she put down her pen. What strikes me most about Loreta Velazquez is not the disguise, or the battles, or even the audacity of re-enlisting after getting caught. It is the pattern. Every single time reality told her no, her family said no, society said no, the army said no, a general said no, she simply found a different door. Not because she was invincible, because she refused to accept that the story was over. And maybe that is the most human thing in this entire wild tale, the stubbornness to keep rewriting your own narrative, even when the people with power insist the book is closed. If stories like this one are the kind of thing that makes you lose track of time on YouTube, this channel has a lot more of them. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you. I will see you there.